evening here in the Middle East. Good afternoon, New York. This is The Lineup. I'm Gabrielle Weiniger. Tonight, the war in Syria takes a deadly twist as fighting rages in Aleppo, its second biggest city, in the grip of a humanitarian crisis. A Russian helicopter was shot down earlier today in Syria's Idlib province. 5 Russian military personnel on board have been killed, including one female crew member whose passport was found in the rubble. Russia says the helicopter was delivering aid to the besieged city when it was shot down. What now for Russian involvement in the war in Syria? Plus, tonight, the US confirms it has launched its first airstrikes in another country, Libya. Could a new front be opening in the war against ISIS? We'll be discussing all these issues and more. But first, Mohammed Al-Qasim reports on the Russian helicopter down.
A Russian Mi-8 military transport helicopter was shot down on Monday in northern Syria. The helicopter crashed over a rebel-held area in Idlib province, sending plumes of black smoke billowing into the sky. The Kremlin said 5 crew members were killed as they were returning from a humanitarian mission to the city of Aleppo. Meanwhile, another hospital bombed in Syria, this time in the southern city of Daraa. 3 other hospitals have been attacked in just the last few days in the northern city of Aleppo. There, fighting is raging between Syrian forces supported by intense Russian airstrikes and the Syrian opposition entrenched in the city's eastern part. As pro-government forces lay siege to Aleppo, rebels are fighting back and making some gains inside the government-controlled western part. They're trying to break the government blockade of the city, where more than 250,000 people are trapped with little food and medical aid. However, contrary to what the government has said, rebel leaders inside Aleppo say no one has used these so-called safe routes.
The regime claims to have opened passages to Salah ad-Din. These are lies. We don't need passages. We are determined in all of the east neighborhoods of Aleppo. If God wants, we will open Aleppo. We don't want it to be said that we are besieged. We aren't besieged. We will open the routes, and these are facts, not just words.
All this comes amid news that the United Nations Deputy Special Envoy for Syria arrived in the capital Damascus in hope of restarting negotiations between the government and opposition groups sometime in August.
I informed the minister and his deputy of the intention of the Special Envoy de Mistura to reconvene the intra-Syrian talks towards the end of August.
Elsewhere in Syria, the US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces has wrestled out 70% of the city of Manbij from the hands of the Islamic State fighters.
Now we're in the city of Manbij on the 0 point at Al-Dala Circle. Islamic State is meters away from us and the cultural center is approximately 200 meters from us.
Intense fighting continues in Syria between the government forces and its allies and the opposition. They're all desperate to make significant advances to gain the upper hand at the negotiation table.
Let's take you live now to Alexander Nekrasov, former Kremlin advisor, who's joining us from London. Alexander, the downing of the chopper, that's the second Russian aircraft downed in Syria. What does it mean for Russian involvement in the country?
Well, everybody expected that there would be risks linked to this operation, military operation. So, of course, it's a tragedy. But the problem is, of course, when the military are helping in humanitarian missions, they do not have the same cover as, for example, the aircraft, the American-led coalition. And that's the problem, because they are vulnerable to gunfire and other fire from the ground. And that's, unfortunately, is the problem, and there's nothing much you can do about it. So these 5 people died bravely while helping the people of Aleppo.
Well, Alexander, as you claim, Russia says it was delivering aid to those rebel-held areas in Aleppo. That's rather convenient, isn't it, Alexander?
Well, what do you mean convenient? The Russians have been providing aid to Aleppo, and unfortunately, the problem is that the rebels in Aleppo, including ISIS and others, are continuing to be supplied with arms. The flow of arms is going on, and that's why we have that standoff and that fighting going on as well. At the moment, it's unclear, what sort of equipment and weapons were used to down the military, the aircraft.
But Alexander, we're seeing on social media, they're questioning the Russian account. They're saying the empty rocket pods in the wreckage of the helicopter suggest it was not, in fact, delivering humanitarian aid. What would you say to that?
Well, first of all, I'd say that never trust the social media. We already had the experience with Libya. We already had experience with other areas in Syria. There's a determined group of people working on social media that provides false information immediately. So I would caution anybody from making any conclusions based on that. So why would the Russian military lie when there's an obvious humanitarian operation going on? And as I said again, these aircrafts, these helicopters are vulnerable because of that humanitarian mission. Believe me, if that was a military mission, there would have been jet fighters immediately in the area, and all these rebels would have been already destroyed.
All right, Alexander, we're going to leave it there for the moment. I want to introduce our correspondent and analyst, Mohammed Al-Qasim. Mohammed, thank you for being with us. Who shut down this Russian helicopter?
At the moment, no one knows, and I think it has been also confirmed by the militias on the ground that it could be, actually, this helicopter could be on a mission, a humanitarian aid mission. However, that area does not have a huge presence of the Islamic State. What it has is other moderate, so-called moderate opposition groups backed by the United States, but also it has Ahrar al-Sham and also the formerly known Jabhat al-Nusra, now as Jabhat Fath al-Sham, is very involved in that area. In fact, it's very active. And some of those groups may have also Tau rockets supplied by the U.S. And if that happens to be the case of how this helicopter has been brought down, it will be extremely problematic for the relationship between Russia and the United States.
We'll have to wait and see with that. Mohammed, stay with us. I want to take you now to news coming out of Libya. The U.S. has carried out airstrikes on positions of the Islamic State in the port city of Sirte, an IS stronghold. Now, apparently after a request backed by the UN-backed government there. Now, Libyan Prime Minister Fayez Sarraj, in a televised address, said the strikes caused heavy losses, but Western powers have become increasingly concerned at the Islamic State's growing presence in the country. Now, the airstrikes are the first such U.S. military intervention coordinated with the Libyan unity government. To discuss, let's talk to Mohammed again. Is this an expansion of a war from the Western-backed government, from the West against the Islamic State group?
Absolutely, and the West has been very much concerned about the influence of the Islamic State in Libya. With the shrinking territory in Iraq and Syria, the Islamic State fighters are finding a more fruitful and good environment for them to be in the coastal city of Sirte and in Libya, because there is chaos. And that's why the Fayez Sarraj, the Prime Minister of the Unity Government, has requested directly to President Obama and to the United States government to intervene and target those Islamic State fighters in Libya, because the government hasn't been able to take them out on its own. And also because, as I said, the huge growing influence of the Islamic State fighters in Libya at the moment.
All right, Mohammed Al-Qasim, thank you very much for this. Now, this year has seen increasing attacks linked to ISIS, not only in war zones across the Middle East, but in Europe and beyond, from the United States to Bangladesh. According to an intelligence group which tracks acts of terror, there has been a significant attack directed or inspired by ISIS every 84 hours since June 8th in cities not including Iraq, Syria, Sinai and Libya. More on the report by the Intel Center Group by our security correspondent, Anna Aronheim.
Mehdi Namouche, Mohammed Merah, Saleh Abdeslam, Abdulhamid Abaoud, Amadi Koulibaly, Laroussi Ablala, and many more. Once petty criminals, they all left prison as deadly jihadists. In prisons across Europe, convicted terrorists who have the respect of many of their fellow inmates are seeking out and grooming those they consider vulnerable in radical Islamist ideology, encouraging them to join militant groups abroad or carry out attacks at home.
There's a phenomenon in recent years, what I call Islam by reaction. Muslims who have never practiced Islam, even converts who converted just 1 month ago, how do they know Islam? And it's they who carry out jihad.
et ils vont faire le djihad.
In France, which is said to have spawned more Islamic State fighters than any other Western country, some 42 terrorism-related arrests were made in 2015. And according to French officials, over 1,000 inmates are under surveillance by intelligence services, suspected of being Islamist radicals. Hoping to curb this trend of prison radicalization, both France and Belgium have instituted several measures, from de-radicalization programs or segregating inmates suspected of being radical Islamists. But according to French prison officials, it's not working. So with the unprecedented number of Europeans returning from the front lines as battle-hardened IS jihadists, do authorities put these militants into general population wards with the ability to radicalize vulnerable youth, or do they keep them all in special separate wards where they are better able to hatch deadly jihadist plots? Or do they risk the legal challenge of taking these inmates and throwing them in solitary confinement, and then throwing away the key?
Now to discuss, let's cross live to Stratford VP of Tactical Analysis, Scott Stewart. Scott, thanks for being with us. So this latest claim, thank you, says there's an ISIS attack every 84 hours. Is that a fair assessment, in your opinion, Scott?
Well, I think we need to pay attention to the calendar a little bit, too. We really did have an uptick in the tempo during Ramadan, which is something that we normally expect just because of the way that the jihadists view Ramadan as a particularly good time to pull off those kind of attacks. But definitely we have seen the tempo ticking up, both of the attacks conducted by the Islamic State's forces itself in places, like Saudi Arabia and Lebanon, but also we've seen this uptick of both these inspired attacks and attacks by these franchise groups like in Bangladesh.
As you said, an uptick of attacks during Ramadan, so it seems to be the summer of ISIS. How long do you think this season will last?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, and I wish I had an answer to it. But we have seen previous spates like this before. I'm thinking back really to the autumn of 2014, right after we had al-Adnani's first appeal to grassroots jihadis to conduct attacks in the West. And we had attacks, a couple attacks in Canada, we had an attack in New York, we had attacks in Australia and elsewhere. So we've seen these upticks before. There does seem to be a little bit of a contagion effect too. Once these folks see that other people can conduct attacks, they also try to conduct them. So there's kind of a copycat factor as well.
Well, in that case, how do you even recommend that Western governments fight against this kind of terror, such as what you mentioned, lone wolf attacks and terror cells?
Well, it's important to understand that government can't do everything themselves. Quite frankly, there are just too many potential attackers, and there are too many potential targets. Basically, everything is a soft target in an open society. But one of the things that is really critical is to understand that that citizens and even the Islamic community need to take their place in helping warn against these activities. It's very, very rare where we see a case where there wasn't some indication of radicalization, some indication of planning, and many times we hear that people merely disregarded them or did not report them. So it's just very important for people to notice and then report the signs of radicalization, the signs of operational planning.
All right, Stratford VP of Tactical Analysis, Scott Stewart, thank you very much for that indeed. Now, fighting continues in Yemen, this time on the border with Saudi Arabia. In some of the worst border clashing since the most recent round of peace talks this year, at least 7 Saudi soldiers are dead. The number of rebel Houthi casualties are, as of yet, still unknown. Danny Swibel has the story.
The shell that killed 4 hit Samta in the southwestern Saudi border region of Jizan. 7 Saudi soldiers and dozens of Houthi fighters were killed in heavy fighting on the border with Yemen on Sunday, as the main combatants in Yemen's war prepared for a further week of peace talks in Kuwait.
The two sides need to satisfy their own allies' interests, which can also make the problem more complicated and difficult and escalate the divergence.
A UN-proposed plan to end fighting in Yemen has been accepted by the Yemeni government, but denied by Houthi rebels. The draft agreement that came after months of UN-backed negotiations in Kuwait did not fulfill the rebels' demand for a unity administration. Houthis, who took control of Yemen's capital Sana'a in September 2014, continued towards the second-largest city, Aden, prompting a Saudi-led Arab coalition to launch a military operation in 2015 to push back the Houthis and restore leader Abd Rabbi Mansour Hadi. The fighting continues until today, with many experts fearing this may be the last chance for a settlement.
The continuous deadlock may lead to a failure of the peace talks, and even a complete failure, because there's no trust between the two sides. What worries us most is that this may be the last chance for the talks, and we may not have another one.
The UN says the civil war in Yemen, viewed by many as a theater of Cold War between Saudi Arabia and Iran, has killed more than 6,400 people, with more than 2.5 million people forced to leave their homes. As more than 80% of the population is in need of humanitarian aid, and with seemingly no end to the fighting in sight, these numbers will only continue to rise.
Now to discuss, our correspondent and analyst Mohammed Al-Qasim is back with us. Mohammed, thank you. Listen, Saudi Arabia is already involved in the war, leading the coalition, but this border clash and the death of civilians brings it a bit closer to home, doesn't it? Are they beginning to feel the cost, and will this change their policy in any way?
It has been, Gabby, for the last few months, the Saudis have felt this pain coming from the Yemeni Houthis with sending them artillery shells as well as rockets launched from Yemen into Saudi Arabia. Now we're seeing casualties, not only military casualties, but also civilians, which will put more pressure on the Saudi government to probably push for a more peaceful resolution to this more than a year conflict. Saudi Arabia hasn't been able, with the coalition that it put together with many Arab countries, to end this conflict. It was hoping that it may end it within a few weeks and maybe a couple of months, but it has dragged on for so long, and the Houthis and its allies with former President Ali Abdullah Saleh's forces have been very, very resilient.
Mohammed Al-Qasim, a year-long conflict there in Yemen. Thank you very much for this. Now, Turkey has captured 11 soldiers accused of trying to seize the president during the last month's failed coup. That's all but one of the soldiers said to be involved. Now, this after a 2-week manhunt amid a continued security crackdown, targeting tens of thousands of people suspected to be linked to that attempted overthrow. Anna Aronheim with the story.
11 fugitive commandos who tried to capture Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan during the failed military coup have been detained by Turkish special forces. The soldiers, who were part of a group which launched an attack on a hotel where Erdogan had been vacationing, were captured in the same southwestern resort town of Marmaris. As more soldiers who took part in the failed coup are found and jailed, a barren plot of land near a construction site has been turned into a graveyard for the soldiers involved. According to Turkey's Religious Affairs Directorate, there would not be any funeral services or prayers for the dead rebel soldiers buried in what has been called Traitors' Graveyard.
Just looking at this sign gives you chills. Not just Turkey, but nowhere in the world has ever seen a sign like this. To read Traitors' Graveyard, we are talking about an insult to our country, our flag, our people, a betrayal. This means our authorities, our government, thinks that this is what they deserved.
2 weeks after the failed coup, Erdogan continues to crack down on all suspected opponents, most recently announcing that all military academies will be shut and changes will be made aimed at giving him more control over the armed forces and intelligence.
The issue of schools is of critical importance. Military schools will be shut down. With the closure of the military schools, students from all high schools and vocational schools will be able to enroll in the military academy.
Over 1,700 military personnel have been dishonorably discharged for their role in the failed coup, including around 40% of Turkey's admirals and generals.
Let's cross now live to journalist Laura Wells. She joins us from Istanbul. Laura, quite a night for security forces. Can you describe for us how these soldiers were caught?
They've been collecting these soldiers over the past 2 weeks. They've been combing various parts of forest. They've been looking in tunnels for drainage, etc. There's been some live footage on television. People are eagerly watching what is happening since Many believe that these soldiers were going to kill President Erdogan, but of course he escaped before they attacked the hotel. Some police officers, local police officers, were killed in that attack. So it's just been a manhunt that's been ongoing, and the Turkish armed forces have put a lot of manpower behind it.
And Laura, I'm seeing that the Turkish defense minister, he just spoke and he said the arrests are not over yet. He says 311 soldiers have been arrested, but 9 generals are still not captured. Are we going to see this crackdown continue?
I'm sure we are. We have at least 5 military personnel that are trying to plead asylum in Greece. They got to Greece the night of the coup, the failed coup, and they've applied for asylum. They said they're worried for their lives, although they have said they weren't involved in the coup. They just believe that they will be swept up in what they're calling a witch hunt. But certainly every day brings new numbers of those who have been either fired or detained, including journalists, academics. The list goes on and on. There's certainly a lot of people in the public sector, about 66,000 now have lost their jobs.
All right, Laura Wells, our journalist from Istanbul, thank you very much for this update. To the US elections now, and the mother of a slain Muslim soldier has slammed presidential hopeful Donald Trump for questioning her silence during a speech by her husband. Ghazala Khan called out Trump as being ignorant about Islam after her husband attacked the Republican nominee in an emotional speech to the Democratic National Convention on Thursday. Our foreign affairs correspondent Owen Altman has the following update.
The conventions are over, and the next big campaign milestone? The debates. Or in this case, the debate over the debates. Traditionally, American presidential candidates meet for 3 debates, usually in September and October. That looks to be the case this year, too, unless it isn't. Enter Donald Trump, noting that 2 debates are scheduled at the same time as American football games. Those games get big ratings. Trump says they'll pull viewers away from the debates, but Clinton argues that the dates are set.
There's a nonpartisan, independent commission that sets up the debates, right? And I was told they set up a schedule last fall. And neither campaign, because who knew? We didn't know who the nominees were going to be. Yeah. We're involved. I'm going to be there. That's all I have to say.
Meanwhile, American media is still abuzz over Trump's feud with Khizr and Ghazala Khan. They took on Trump at the Democratic Convention. Trump suggested the Muslim faith kept Ghazala from speaking on stage. The family now answering back.
The way he showed disrespect towards the Gold Star mother of this country, that says it all.
Your wife?
My wife, the brave mother of my son, Captain Humayun Khan, the hero of this country.
Early polls now show Clinton with a healthy bounce from her convention. But on the road to the White House, twists and turns still lie ahead.
And Owen Altman, our foreign affairs editor, joins us in studio. Owen, thank you for being with us.
Good evening, Gabby.
Trump's in trouble again, isn't he?
He is, and there, you know, Gabby, there are the 5 stages of grief, and I think we now have the 4 stages of the Trump scandal. First, the statement, then the horror, then the reaction, and then the hand-wringing. We're somewhere between reaction and hand-wringing, probably well into the hand-wringing stage on this. The most recent development, John McCain, the Republican candidate in 2008, viewed as a moderate and someone who feels very strongly about the principles and who had questioned those who questioned Barack Obama's faith during the 2008 election, who said he was a Muslim, coming out and condemning Donald Trump for his comments here.
Well, the debates are coming up, but there's a debate about the debate, isn't there?
There is a debate about the debates. We heard a bit of it during the piece. Here's the story, Gabby. Back last September, what's called the Commission on Presidential Debates scheduled the 3 customary presidential debates for September and October of this year. Donald Trump now says, but wait, 2 of those debates are scheduled at the same time as NFL games, as American football games.
That's a difficult choice for the American public, politics or football, or soccer as you call it.
Football is close to our religion, and this is American football. This is the real thing, with helmets and pointy balls. So yeah, no, a very, very popular sport and gets huge television ratings, especially the Sunday night games. And at least one of the debates is scheduled on a Sunday night. So Donald Trump saying, wait, this schedule doesn't make any sense. No one's going to be watching the debates. Let's change it. Hillary Clinton saying, but wait, why didn't you say something last September? This has already been set. Gabi, nobody actually thinking about the common sense solution. Don't move the debates. maybe the NFL should move its games. Maybe the football games shouldn't take priority to the debates, but vice versa.
I wonder who's going to back down first. Finally, Owen, I want to hear who's leading in the polls, Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump?
Well, most recent polls show Hillary Clinton leading, but again, Gabby, that's to be expected. Why? She's coming out of her convention, so she has what's called a bounce. Polls showing that she has about a 5 or 6 point bounce, but again, we may be seeing more polls over the next few days. It takes a few days to actually do the polling, crunch the numbers, and come back, but it does look like she had that bounce. But we should remember that this may be a temporary phenomenon, and we'll look at some models from Nate Silver, the statistical guru, and his projections. This one we have is his, I believe, his Polls Plus model, which actually which takes into account the issue of this convention bounce, and because of it tends to discount it, showing Hillary Clinton with over a 60% chance of winning, which may not, and if you look at the immediate polls, her chances might be even bigger than that. But again, this takes a bit of a longer view. Nate Silver also with a couple of other models showing a few other different numbers. I think the bottom line, Gabby, don't pay too much attention to the polls today, tomorrow, or the day after. Pay more attention towards the end of the month.
Well, you'll be with us today, tomorrow, and the day after. Owen Alterman, thank you
definitely.
very much.
Pleasure.
And let's see some of the other stories defining the day from around the world.
Hong Kong hunkered down as Typhoon Nita swirled towards the coast of southern China, with more than 100 flights canceled and schools closed. Authorities are expected to raise a T8 storm signal, the third highest, in the evening as the storm edges closer to the city, packing winds of 120 kilometers per hour. Nita will be the first major storm of the season to hit Hong Kong, which is often battered by tropical cyclones during the summer. Thousands of Brazilians took to the streets in cities across the country, expressing their support or condemnation for the impeachment of President Dilma Rousseff. In Sao Paulo, the anti-Rousseff demonstrators gathered at the iconic Paulista Avenue, the stage for some of the biggest pro- and anti-government rallies throughout the impeachment process. The impeachment of Rousseff, who is now provisionally suspended, is considered a done deal. India will try to repatriate workers from Saudi Arabia who have been laid off from their jobs, more than 10,000 of which are facing a food crisis. Low oil prices have forced the Saudi government to slash spending since last year. As a result, some companies have been struggling to pay foreign workers and have laid off tens of thousands, leaving many with no money for food, let alone for tickets home. Thai elephants are helping to boost awareness to the August 7th referendum by handing out leaflets to motorists in Ayutthaya province. The animals took to the streets, along with Thai students, to encourage Thais to vote on whether to accept the draft constitution. Less than 3 weeks before a contentious constitutional referendum, Thailand's military government is scrambling to drum up support, broadcasting song and television programs in a vigorous public relations campaign. The musical Cats has returned to Broadway for the first time in 16 years. Andrew Lloyd Webber's fan favorite opened its revival at the Neil Simon Theater. After opening on the West End in 1981, the musical came across the Atlantic in 1982 and ran through 7,485 performances over 18 years before closing in 2000. Since its world premiere, Cats has been presented in over 30 countries and translated into 15 languages.
We're going on a short break now. Stay with us 2 minutes. We'll be right back.